Hello everybody, this is Mr. Pulse again, and today we're going to talk about climate. We're going to talk about what climate is, and we're going to talk about what it isn't. One way to compare what it isn't is to compare it to what you do know already, and that is weather. So let's talk about climate versus weather. Climate is the average temperature and rainfall of an area or of a place over a very long period of time. Weather, on the other hand, is the average temperature and rainfall of a place over a very short period of time. Another way of thinking of it is climate is what you expect to happen over a period of time, and weather is what you actually get over a short period of time. Okay, there's two ways that climate can vary. One is whether it is an extreme or moderate climate. One example of an extreme climate that you see here is the polar climate. It has a very long and very cold winter and a very short, cool summer. A moderate climate, on the other hand, has 4 seasons, not just 2 like the extreme polar climate. It has a spring, summer, fall, and winter, and the winter and summers are relatively mild as compared to extreme climates. We do get snow, but as you can see from these photos, the snow is rather thin and, of course, nowhere near the amount of snow that falls in more extreme climates. Again, looking at weather is something that you're familiar with, something that you take into account to plan out your daily or weekly activities. You want to know what's going to happen tomorrow because you have an event scheduled and it happens to be outdoors. You want to know what the chances are of rain. You need to make plans accordingly. What this picture with the cars jumbled up on an interstate is from the ice storm that happened 4 years ago. And that was something that was different than the type of climate that we're used to. It was something that we did not expect to happen, yet it's what we got. It was a weather event, it's what we got. So weather does vary, as climate does, but climate is something, again, that happens over a very long period of time, and weather is something that happens over a short period of time. 3 factors that affect climate. Latitude, factor number 1, simply how far or how close your place is from the equator. Nearer the equator, the hotter it's going to be. Farther from the equator, the colder it's going to be. The second factor is altitude. How high up is the place? The higher up you go, the colder the air becomes. And then finally, ocean currents. Ocean currents affect climate by moving either warm or cold ocean water from one part of the planet to another. Latitude effect on climate. When you're closer to the equator, such as the Brazilian rainforest, the Congo rainforest, or the Indonesian rainforest, you have a very hot climate, and in this case, these 3 locations are right on the equator. It's also very rainy. Another extreme based on latitude is the polar climates, the furthest you can get from the equator. The winters, again, as we'd mentioned, extremely long and extremely cold. North Pole, South Pole. Again, very cold winters, very long winters. And then finally, the mid-latitudes, that's the kind of climate that we have. We're kind of in the Goldilocks zone. It's just right. Not too far, not too close to the equator. So we have 4 seasons, relatively mild or moderate weather. Yes, it does get hot in the wintertime. Yes, sometimes it gets cold. But on average, we have a rather moderate, mild climate. Again, as we had mentioned, how high up you go in a place affects the climate. The higher up you go, the colder the air will be. The lower, the warmer the air will be. This is a picture of Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa. as you see at the base of the mountain, is very warm indeed. But as you go up, and actually at the top of the mountain, it's cold enough that snow stays on it year round. Altitude also can affect or change climate by blocking wind. It can block wind that carries warm, moist air, and so on one side of the mountain range, it'll be warm and rainy, and on the other side of the mountain range, it'll be cold and dry. And finally, ocean currents. Ocean currents can affect climate in different parts of the world. For example, the Gulf Stream ocean current has ocean water that's warmed by the equator and then flows past the United States up to Europe. This affects the climate of Europe. It makes it much warmer and much rainier than it would otherwise be. Remember, Europe is very far from the equator, so you would expect the climate based on the latitude factor to be cold, but it is not. The weather is basically very similar to our weather here in the United States. Yes, it does get cold. Yes, it does get hot, but it's a moderate climate, the same type of climate that we have here in the United States. Another current that I'd like to mention is the California current. This happens to be an cold ocean current. It brings cold ocean water from Alaska down the west coast of the United States. So consequently, Los Angeles in summertime can be hot, but if you go to the ocean and swim in the ocean, you'll find the ocean is rather cold and doesn't seem to fit the latitude that you're in. Again, this is the effect that ocean currents have on the area's climate. 3 factors that affect climate. First, latitude. How far or how close a place is to the equator. The closer to the equator, the warmer the climate's going to be. The further from the equator, the colder the climate's going to be. Second factor is altitude. How high up or how low a place is. The higher up you go in a place, the colder the climate's going to be. And then finally, ocean currents. Ocean currents can affect climate by moderating the climate. So in other words, thinking back to Europe, Europe is very far from the equator. You would expect Europe to be rather cold. It's not cold. It's actually the same type of climate that we have here in the United States, and that is because of the Gulf Stream ocean current that flows near it.